Welcome to Sound Unlimited for all things newsy, juicy, sporty, tasty, and more.
In a testimony before the Judicial Conduct Tribunal, gender expert Vetten outlined the power dynamics that are in play when it comes to workplace harassment. She said sexual harassment thrived where there was power imbalance and defined it as a transgression of boundaries. She explained the role of power relations between men and women in the workplace, the consequences of saying no, which could lead to victimization and career limitation, and the various ways of communicating no to the perpetrator. She further said that WhatsApp communication, as it related to sexual harassment, should be looked at contextually to determine the pattern of engagement. She revealed that there were 47 days of WhatsApp conversation between the complainant, Mbenenge, and the respondent, Judge President Mbenenge. According to Vetten, Mengo only initiated conversations with Mbenenge 5 times, and it was on work-related matters. She said Mbenenge knew that what he was doing by repeatedly requesting a topless picture of Mengo was inappropriate. She said the fact that he asked her to delete that conversation was a clear indication of this assertion.
First, I want to ask you, what method did you use to evaluate the interactions between Ms. Mengo and the respondent, Judge President Mbenenge?
Certainly. So I think the starting point has to obviously be some kind of definition or operationalization or understanding of what does the term sexual harassment encompass? What does it mean? So therefore, the guidance I looked at was that taken from the 2022 Code of Good Practice on the prevention and elimination of harassment in the workplace. And I think what's important about that is that it's identifying sexual harassment as an overarching term or as an umbrella term that comprises different kinds of conduct. So in terms of the code, it's prescribed, or it's recognizing there are 4 different kinds of conduct. These can take physical forms. So it's looking at the form that the sexual harassment may take. It can be expressed physically in terms of unwanted touching through to its most serious, which is rape. The verbal, as in the spoken, and the non-verbal, which might be just in terms of, say, sending pictures or creating an uncomfortable or hostile working environment. And then the last form is quid pro quo, as in you do something for me and I'll do something for you, which is really just give me a sexual favor or benefit or something, and I will give you a benefit in exchange. So those are the 4 forms of sexual harassment set out. In terms of the code, I put it into my report, verbal conduct from whistling through all the way through to jokes, repeatedly and persistently asking somebody out on a date, etc. So I think what's important is that the code recognizes that in some instances, behavior will need to be repeated and persistent to qualify as harassment. But there are some forms of behavior which are egregious. They only need to occur once. So for instance, grabbing somebody's crotch is grossly offensive. You don't need to do this on a repeated basis before somebody recognizes that that is harassment. So I think one of the ways we can think about it is as a repeated transgression of somebody's boundaries. You said no, or you've tried to communicate no, or you have indicated a reluctance and an unwillingness, and that keeps on being ignored.
Just a little bit slower so
Sure.
that everyone can take notes. So there must be repeated transgression of somebody's boundaries.
Yes. So saying no or indicating that something is unwanted or showing that you are reluctant and that you are unwilling. And I think what the code recognizes is that in an ideal world, when that happens, we'd all be able to say, no, stop that right now. This makes me uncomfortable. Please do not do that again. But the code does recognize that that's not always possible. It talks about, for instance, you can just walk away or not respond. And much of the literature, much of the legislation looks at the fact that one of the reasons why sexual harassment occurs and why it is so difficult to deal with is because of power imbalances. And that is where one has to look at these very carefully in order to consider, was somebody genuinely in a position to say no? Could they clearly communicate how they felt about a situation? Could they tell somebody to stop? And we can see in law that those kinds of situations do occur. And if we look at rape, for instance, there is quite a clear recognition that there is a difference between submission and consent. That one can say yes, because saying yes might be the less worse of two terrible choices. And that if and that's submitting, that for consent to be meaningful, it has to be genuinely given. Otherwise, it is simply superficial. So there has to be a substantive, meaningful sense undergirding a consent. You know, it's not meaningful to say, oh, you consented if your child is in the room at the time and you are being raped. Saying yes does not mean you were consenting, you are submitting because of what is going on. So I'm using the example of rape, but law has recognized that there are occasions where it may look like you are agreeing to something, but it's not meaningful agreement. So, and I think there's also increasingly a recognition that consent to one thing doesn't imply consent to any behavior that follows. You know, so wearing a short skirt and accepting a drink does not mean you have consented to any other behavior beyond that, for instance.
Sorry, I didn't understand the previous point you made.
Which one?
The point just before that one. You're talking about as if the consent may not look genuine, or may look this way but may not be genuine, or something to that effect.
Yes.
Just explain that.
Sure. So I'll use a very blunt example. If somebody says, the one example is, if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to beat you to a pulp. Well, all right, yes, I'll have sex with you. Or the other example, which we've seen in law, is somebody breaks in, they are about to assault you. You say, okay, no, hold on. I'll cooperate. Can you wear a condom? They put on the condom, rape, and then leave. We have had cases where the law has recognized that you saying to that person, okay, I'll cooperate if you stop beating me and wearing a condom, that did not mean you consent to what happened. What you tried to do was, you had the option, there was no way you were not going to escape being raped. All that was within control at that point in time was whether or not you were going to also be beaten very, very badly and possibly end up with a sexually transmitted infection as well. So the courts have understood that under some circumstances you have very constrained choice. It is very restricted. You have very few options. You try to exercise what agency you can within a very limited context of choice. That where that context and those constraints are so limited, you can't genuinely call that consent. That is submission.
In your summary that you provided to us, also under the method employed to arrive at your opinion, you indicated that for biological reasons, women and men's expressions and experience of their sexuality are not the same. Can you explain that to us as well?
Certainly. So I think one of the things one also has to take into account is that we have a history of thinking that, well, men have these explosive, uncontrollable sexual urges that once aroused, they cannot be stopped. And I mean, this is what some of the mythology that has informed and excused rape, for example. Oh, she had on a short skirt and I was so overcome and she'd allowed me to fondle and kiss her, and I was just so overcome with my feelings that there was nothing I could do except continue. And that's been referenced this kind of biological, explosive idea of male sexuality that it is basically uncontrollable. Once you arouse it, it cannot be stopped. I mean, that is not correct. But it is a myth that can function as an excuse for rape. And I think we have worked in many ways to understand that men are certainly well able to control themselves, and that we cannot allow that kind of mythology that has arisen and developed to allow sexual violence and abuse to continue. So I think when you look at cases that involve sexual harassment and sexual abuse, it is important to understand whether or not there is any recourse to myths and stereotypes in order to explain conduct. And whether or not that's allowing thinking to be clouded, whether or not when you're trying to assess behavior, whether you're trying to look at what is here presented to you and to what extent your thinking about that is perhaps clouded by other ideas or ways of trying to explain what you've seen. And I've said one of those which is often clouded thinking has been this idea that men and women have vastly different sexual urges. Men's are much more urgent than women's. And I think the other idea that has developed from that is that men pursue, and it's up to women to say yes or resist. So we live in a society that has granted men a much more active sexuality and women a far more passive sexuality. They wait for men to approach them. They do not go out to the first man they see and say how fabulous he looks in that pair of tight pants and when can they get together. Society would think that a little strange, whereas we accept the idea that if a man will go up to a woman, you look fantastic, whatever. So we have created a society that does treat men's and women's sexuality very differently. I mean, as a very common example, if we talk about sexuality, is that take the word whore. It's very hard. It's a word we use for women. It's very hard to find an equivalent for a man who we consider to be overly sexual in an insulting way. We might call him a stud, for instance, but that's admiring and speak of his virility. But when we talk about women who are very sexually active, we tend to use very derogatory terms like whore. So I give that as examples of the way in which society has constructed quite different ways of thinking about men's and women's sexuality, in which active sexuality in women tends to be frowned on, whereas active sexuality in men is recognized, acknowledged, and even admired. And I think that is what can also make sexual harassment quite difficult, is that men will persist, saying, oh, but, women just they just need a little bit of persuasion. I just need to work a little bit harder. Or the other myth, women say no when they mean yes, and women play hard to get. Those kinds of stereotypes, I think, get in the way and make it difficult to deal with harassment.
Thank you. If we go to 2.1.2 in your summary, that is where you say that in the case of sexual harassment, these gender relations of power can become complexly intertwined. Can you explain that for us slowly?
Sure. So we have, I think, already what we can call gendered power relations that tend to structure relations between men and women in a particular way. I've outlined some of those. Men advance, propose, women accept whatever. So you've already got that kind of relationship. And I think it's also a power relationship in the sense that, there are many examples of it. The Constitution has tried to address it. We speak often of gender inequality, which manifests in a range of ways. Workplace is one, in that you will find who performs what work. And this is precisely why we have things like employment equity and affirmative action in order to address this. Who does what work is very gendered. So if you walk into a garage, for example, you will find that most mechanics are men. It will be unusual to find women mechanics. If you walk into an office and you look at who are the secretaries, they will predominantly be the women. If you look at who are the CEOs and the senior managers, they will predominantly be men. So you have that kind of structuring in terms of who holds positions, who is likely to hold what position, and what kind of qualities we associate with women's positions. You know, so a secretary is often there to serve, to make coffee, to make tea. I'm speaking now obviously in very general terms. Is supposed to be doing the service side. The service side. Women are more typically, or anybody else who's in a subordinate position, there to listen and to carry out instructions. So you have that kind of, you bring in the gendered social relations, and then you see how gendered relations also inform workplace structures. Then workplaces obviously have their own sets of hierarchies. In order for people to do their work, clearly those who are in positions of authority need to be able to have the authority to be able to instruct, in order to be able to ask people to do work. And if people do not do work, to take the necessary steps to ensure that they do the work. So we have these complex, you know, in terms of labor law, what do you do in terms of disciplining, instructing, the consequences of not performing, etc. So you have those who can instruct and who can't instruct. Hence your ideas about insubordination, because you are not obeying instructions, for example. So workplaces are quite clearly structured they are hierarchical, because you need to have that kind of relationship, and they are more or less hierarchical. Some are extremely hierarchical. If you look at the police, for example, that is command and control. It is instruction, the same with the military. But you wouldn't quite find that kind of degree of control in your everyday workplace, for instance. But nonetheless, there is still an authority structure, because of the nature of work and what needs to be done. So you have those kinds of relationships, and it's why we have workplace law, is to be able to set out who is overstepping their authority, who is disregarding authority. So, and with that, you also have your things like your job descriptions, in order to set out who is required to do what, so that again we can get into these questions of, I can instruct you to do this because your job is required, this is your job, or I don't have to do this because this is not part of my job. So workplaces, you know, different industries have different norms, but they are very structured in terms of how do you work, who does what, who says what, who listens, who obeys, what are the sanctions. So that is why it can become quite complicated once you're dealing with sexual harassment, because saying no to somebody who is your senior is difficult. Firstly, it is an inversion of the relationship as to who directs or instructs, and who follows instructions. So for a junior person to tell a senior person, it can be a very difficult thing to do, precisely because there is that inversion. The other thing is, what are the consequences of me saying no to somebody who holds a higher position in the hierarchy than I do? If I say no, I am their junior, will they take me seriously? And what are the consequences? Can this person victimize me? Can they make my work uncomfortable? Can they ask me to go and start doing work that I don't want to do? Can they start taking away workplace opportunities from me? Can they start speaking to me in a way that is extremely uncomfortable and makes my work miserable? So this is where it starts to get uncomfortable, because you now have not just the operation of the informal social relationship of gender, but you now have a structured relationship upheld by law that sets out, this is how you will relate to each other. This is a workplace. This is who says this and who does this and who does that. So that is why it becomes very difficult. But I think one must also think in relation to sexual harassment and power relations. You have your structured relations and what we would call formal power. So formal power will obviously be where you have your organogram. It's formalized. This is your position. This is your position. This is what you do. This is what you do. It's set out. It's formalized. But then I think when you look at sexual harassment between peers, it's important to realize that power is very much more complex than just a question of position.
But in this instance, we are working with different power relations. There's a vast difference between the judge president and the judge's secretary. Is that correct?
Very definitely. And I think there is also a situation here where, obviously, if you're talking about power, there are layers of power. So you can talk about someone's immediate line manager. That's the person who has direct control over them. So in this case, from as I understand it, Judge Mbenenge would not have been the line manager, and courts, as I understand them, and I stand to be corrected, don't quite have that kind of arrangement. You have a judge who's not necessarily somebody's line manager, but nonetheless, the secretary works or is not necessarily directly employed by the judge, but that's who they work for. That's who they take their instruction from, and they work for that person. So you have multiple, from what I can see of the courts, they have multiple layers of hierarchy. So you have your judge, who you may be immediately working for, but then you have somebody who's at the apex, a judge president, who is responsible not just for that particular court, but for the entire province. So it's a little bit like, in a company, you have your line manager and then there's the CEO. The CEO might not be your direct line manager, but you still would not be rude to the CEO. That person is the most senior person. So I think this is where it's important to think about other dimensions of power beyond just the formal that I spoke to you about. There's also the questions of influence. So even if somebody doesn't directly manage you, they can influence, again, you can see this university, they can influence your career progression. If that person carries a lot of status and credibility, and I think this is the other important thing to look at, is how position confers other aspects of power, which include things like status and credibility. Who is more likely to be believed? Who has the higher status? Who will be seen as being more credible? Whose word will carry more weight? Even if you have influence, if somebody, I'll use a university example. You might not be employed by that particular person, but that lecturer or that faculty head can tell others in other universities, even if they just need to say something like, because people will say, well, can you recommend that person? What are they like to work with? I would be very careful. You're not, they don't work so well. You're not necessarily giving somebody a formal reference, but you have influence. People come and ask you, what do you think? And your opinion will count and hold weight. So one can also exercise that kind of power and influence, so that even if you've never said anything, you can still have an effect on somebody's career and their career progression. The classic example, if we can use legal examples, is the candidate attorney. They're not employed by the law firm, but if they and one has seen cases like this, if they lay a charge of sexual harassment, those are all senior lawyers who can make their progression and their lives and their careers going forward quite difficult, just because of what they can say and the kind of influence, clout, and weight that they have. So I think it's also important to look at those dimensions of power in addition to having formal positional power.
You mentioned the Code of Good Conduct, the 2022 Code of Good Practice, on the prevention and elimination of harassment. Where did this code come from? What was the starting point for this code? It derived from? Isn't it the Employment Equity Act?
Yes, and it's actually the early code of 1998, when it was called the Code of Good Practice on the Handling of Sexual Harassment. And then it was broadened and widened. And this code has also been influenced to some extent, I think, by the International Labour Organization.
All right. Now, in 2.4 in your summary, you also said that this code also offers some guidance on how conduct may be assessed as unwanted, recognizing that non-consent does not only take form of the stated no. You did mention it a little earlier, but just explain that again to us.
Okay, so I think, as I said, in an ideal world, we would all be able to communicate exactly what we want, need, and mean under all circumstances. But it's recognized that that's not always possible. And also, I think that people can be confused and not always know what to do initially. So it's recognized that you can communicate no in different ways. One of these would be to simply stay silent, or to walk away, Or it could also include things like going to somebody else and asking them to intervene on your behalf to have a word in somebody's ear, for instance. You can deal. There is so there is a recognition that there are different ways in which that this can be communicated.
So do I understand you correctly? The code says you do not have to say no using the words no. You can use these other tactics also to convey your
Correct.
message as being no.
Yes, and the code also recognizes that because you've previously consented in one thing doesn't mean you've given consent in perpetuity. You are required to check if your behavior continues, if behavior continues to be wanted. I mean, I think it's following broader trends that we're seeing, for instance, in 2 cases. The one was the embrace dignity matter, for instance, where the idea is that consent now has to be, we have to look at consent differently. We can't just rely on subjective perception. You actually have to think about, is it reasonable? I mean, the laws also, as I said, had this recognition of coercive circumstances. In relation to rape, for example, it recognizes that there are situations, and it's going back to this point of submission, and one of the points it looks at is where there is an abuse of power or authority. That again, somebody can abuse their position, and this is why you are submitting and appearing to say yes. But this force of abuse or this power and authority is making it hard for you to say no because you're not in equal positions. So I think there is a recognition that you need, that when you look at consent, you actually have to look at the context. What are the circumstances under which somebody is saying yes or no or not saying anything at all? Are there circumstances that enable somebody to speak clearly, to be firm, to state their expressed desires, preferences, and needs?
Just explain to us, how does the concept of coercive circumstances help us understand consent in contexts where power imbalances are present?
Well, you have this in the Sexual Offences Act that there is an abuse of power or authority. So coercive circumstances help us understand that it's hard for somebody to say no because of the authority that the other person wields. That person, them saying no, that person is in a position where they can make life very, very unpleasant. So coercive circumstances you can think about as the recognition that it is a so-called choice in a context of no choice or constrained choice. So coercive circumstances are saying to us, look at the context. Yes or no doesn't occur in a vacuum. Look at what's going on around that person. What are the pressures on them? Have they given meaningful consent? I mean, we look at context, for example, to use another example, in medicine. You can't consent to a medical examination if you're drunk or high, for example. So we are looking at context. Is that person in a position to be able to say yes? What is the nature of their yes?
And how do you approach the interpretation of WhatsApp messages in the context of harassment? Do you look at them individually or in relation to one another? Just explain to us.
Sure. So again, I think one has to look at them contextually. So what has been the previous conversation, for instance, because I think one of the things one must think about in relation to people's interactions with each other is that they're dynamic. They're not fixed in stone. They change. So within the context of say, sexual harassment, you look at how, especially if it's a situation that is ongoing, you look at how is the nature of the engagement changing? Because typically in situations where people have to work together, for example, you can see that somebody is grappling with, how do I deal with this situation? And so they try a range of different tactics and strategies to try to figure out what is the best way I can deal with this? Especially if they can't, and especially if they don't necessarily initially have the confidence or believe that they can say no. They may try different kinds of things. So you can find, for instance, somebody will say, I'll just ignore it. Because if I ignore it, hopefully it will go away. Or if I ignore it, they'll get the message to leave me alone. And then you might see over time that ignoring it is not working. This person doesn't leave you alone. They persist. So then you try something else. Maybe you try and start figuring out, okay, where you figure out what are their workplace habits, where are they usually likely to be. You avoid meetings where they're likely to be. So you use a strategy of avoidance in the hope that you won't bump into them. Maybe this person still finds ways to bump into you. So then you try and make sure that you're always with another person so they can't have that time alone with you. So you look at what is it that somebody is doing to try to manage the situation. And you can sometimes see a progression where somebody gets perhaps progressively more and more annoyed by what's going on, and then eventually they might become quite rude and get to the point where they say to somebody, just stop this. Or they will actually go to their line manager, if it's say somebody they're working with, and say, I need a transfer, I need to go somewhere else. So it's important to look at what is going on here. What are the different things that somebody is doing? Not only that, these are interactions, they're engagements. So if she does this, how does he respond? What is her response to his response? What is his response to her response? So you try to get a sense of what's happening here. What are the strategies and tactics? Because I mean, if I could sum it up, looking at this for somebody who's in this position, the question facing them is like, what are the strategies that are available to me to resist sexual attention from somebody who holds both institutional and moral authority? Somebody who's both an apex judge and a respected church elder, for example, without risking reputational harm or career consequences, and I'm a junior employee. So what's my room to maneuver? What can I do here? And so you'll see different strategies being tested out to see what works, what stops this person. And I said, sometimes you'll see a whole lot of this happening before somebody gets to a point where they'll actually go and lay a grievance. Because they've also realized the situation is now becoming intolerable. Because initially you can see with some women there's a sense of, all right, I'll just ignore it. It's not so bad. Actually, after a while, when it's repeated, it is that bad. So this is, you can't just look at separate, discrete, isolated units of conversation detached from each other. You have to look at how do they build and interact. Plus, you need to look at patterns. What is the pattern of engagement here?
Thank you, Chair. We can then continue. We're going to move to your findings based on the interactions. Just put on your microphone also, please. I'm going to ask you this question again because you did not finish with your answer. What sources of material formed the basis of the raw data that you analyzed specifically for this tribunal?
Sure. I paid a lot of attention to the WhatsApps. So I had the WhatsApps between the 8th of June 2021 and 18th of February 2022. I believe there is more material, but I didn't have access to that. The videos and other pictures referred to, but I didn't have those. I just have the WhatsApps here. I also looked at the evidence in chief and some of the cross-examination.
That is now in the transcripts?
Yes. Yes.
Evidence in chief of which witness?
Ms. Mbenenge, complainant.
And the cross-examination of her?
Not in as much detail as I looked at the evidence in chief.
Yes.
And then what I did was, in order to get a sense of the WhatsApps, I went through them a couple of times, and then I drew up a table for myself of how many WhatsApps there were. So I came to a total of 47.
47 WhatsApps?
No, 47 conversations. So in that particular period. And then I dated each of them. I created a table where the data for each conversation. I looked at who initiated the conversation, and I looked at how many conversations were sent by the judge president and how many by Ms. Mengo. So because I use that as an indication to look at who's initiating the conversation here, who is more active in the conversation here. Because I think that starts to give you a sense of who is asking more often, who is engaging more often, who is engaging less often. Because that can give you some kind of indication as to who is the more interested party here. Is to look at how equally are the messages distributed between the two of them. It's an indication. So based on that, as I said, there were a total of, I counted up approximately 837 WhatsApp texts, with 526 from the judge president and 311 from Ms. Mengo. So I looked at those, and I think
Sorry, 526 from the judge president and
311
from the complainant.
from the complainant.
That is now the WhatsApp, the message, each and every WhatsApp itself that you are now counting.
Yes.
And those 837 WhatsApps were in 47 conversations. Is that what you are saying?
Yes, yes. So we should say 47 days. So
47 days?
Yes. So a total of 47 days of texting distributed over this roughly 7.5 month period. So I think also doing it that way also allowed me to see a couple of patterns already emerging. So you can see, for instance, that on the very first time they text, on the 8th of June, there are 77 texts from the judge president and 52 from the complainant. Another day that also emerges as very busy is the 20th of June, where the judge president sends 84 and Ms. Mengo sends 51. But then you can see a distinct change starting to occur on the 28th of July. You can start to see the number of texts dropping off quite significantly, and you can also see the period of time between them getting longer and longer. So where you'll have had, say, 60, 32, 84 texts, it's now down to 1 to 3 to a maximum of 6. And you also see that the complainant is responding less and less often. There are more and more days where she's just not responding at all. So you can see there's a change. When I was talking about patterns, that's the kind of thing you're looking for. What was happening here? What were the responses? And says you can see that towards the end, Ms. Mengo is not really engaging at all.
All right, you mentioned that you could observe certain patterns in the way the communication occurred between them. If you can just tell us what type of patterns that is, and slowly.
Sure. So then when I looked, these conversations clearly continue. So something might be said on one day, but it might get picked up in another conversation on 2 or 3 further occasions. So you look for that. You also look at what is the conversation about. So for instance, one of the patterns I looked at is I spoke earlier about sexual harassment being an umbrella term. So what are the acts going on here? Obviously it's verbal, it's texting, but it's not. But there are different kinds of things being asked for here. So one of the things that I noticed was requests for photographs.
From whom?
From the judge president to Ms. Mengo. He asked her for photographs. He also asked to be intimate with her. I treat these as different acts because he's asking for things in addition to just texting. He's not just saying, let's have, as he put it, naughty talk or naughty chat. He's asking for her to go and do other things, to go and take a photograph of herself, to meet with him, to be intimate. So there are those two sets of requests, and then there is what I described as sexting, where he would be asking, what is your favorite position? And he'd be sending her videos. So it's conversation there in the moment. It's not asking her to go and do extra things like meet with him to have sex or to go and take a photograph of her private parts, for example. So I saw those three things. I think the other thing I looked at how many times Ms. Mbenenge initiated conversation. And I could see that out of all those conversations, there are 5 times where she starts the conversation. But when she starts the conversation, it is about very neutral workplace-related things. So the examples I gave is the 5. If she wishes Judge Mbenenge a happy Father's Day, she responds to a question asked by him. She says, wow, commenting on his status. She asks for the use of his chambers, and she comments on his status. So most of the conversation she has with him tends to be of a more workplace nature. She doesn't ask him for photographs of himself, for instance, but she does ask for things like, can she use his chambers, for a meeting? So her interactions tend to be about workplace, unless she is responding to him. So I was looking for that as to who talks about what. And then the other kinds of patterns I was looking at was how often, because one of the key components or defining characteristics of harassment is that it must be repeated. So I looked at how often is something asked for. So in order to see, would this qualify as persistent? Would it qualify as repeated? And then I look at the nature, and then I looked at how does she respond to those requests? How can one characterize them? And then do you want me to talk a little bit about how I characterize them? So in terms of looking at her requests, I try to see how does she respond to when she's asked for something. And I could see that she was using a range of different. She was using different strategies to deal with or to communicate what was a reluctance and an unwillingness. So as I said, I saw a range of different strategies which I characterize, and I have gone through and found illustrative examples of what I mean. Is she used what I have characterized as deflection. She tried to turn the subject away into something else and start talking about something else. She used evasion. So she wouldn't necessarily give a direct answer, or she would, which is closely linked sometimes to also what I've called deferral. Oh, I'll do it another time. So postponing the moment. She also used silence, just did not respond. She also used what I described as accommodation, where she would try to accommodate or engage with a request. And she also used active resistance, no. So there are a range of different strategies that are being used, and they're also changing over time. And I think that you can see her figuring out what does or doesn't work and then adapting her efforts accordingly. And then I was also looking at how was Judge Mbenenge responding to her? This is an interaction, it's 2 people. So it is dynamic. What's going on here?
All right. In your summary at 3.2, you said that Judge Mbenenge and Ms. Mengo's interactions occurred within the context of 3 different kinds of asymmetrical roles and relations. If you can go slowly through the 3 different kinds of roles.
So the first is the obvious one, and that is prescribed by the courts themselves. That's the workplace relationship. So Judge Mbenenge is the Eastern Cape Judge President, and Ms. Mengo, the secretary of an unnamed judge. So that's in terms of hierarchy and workplace, but I think there's also the question of status. Whose work will enjoy the higher status? And a judge, and especially a judge president, will have higher status than that of a secretary.
And the second one?
The second one is that it appears through reading through the record that it had become a habit or a practice on Judge Mbenenge's part for judges or for the secretaries to think of their judges as fathers and mothers. So putting them in a kind of, it's again a different kind of asymmetry, a parental, respected, older, elder relationship. Yours is the more junior. And one can see times in the WhatsApps where she refers to him as daddy. He asks her if her mum, the judge, who's a judge at the time, who came to her mum's birthday. So there's that kind of other additional layer there in terms of how you relate, in terms of the levels of respect and authority that are being exercised. This is obviously much more informal because it's not practice in the courts. It's not instruction from the courts or a policy in the courts that this is how the relationship between judges and secretaries should be structured.
And the third role?
The third is that between men is in terms of heterosexual relations between men and women.
So that is gender.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing, but that comes closely, I think, in relation to the father, judge, secretary, child, is obviously there's an age or generational difference going on as well. Sometimes Ms. Mengo makes reference to it is also that of a church elder, but that doesn't really necessarily seem to affect this situation. But that's their part of who he is as well. She does use it at some point.
Can you explain what you said here in 3.3? Those roles and the power relations, they represent blurred interactions between Judge Mbenenge and Ms. Mengo. What did you mean by the blurred interactions?
Sure. So I think to go back to what I was saying earlier about sexual harassment being a transgression of boundaries and workplaces having quite strictly defined, structured relationships between people. So one of the things that goes with authority is obviously respect. So one of the ways in which you try to maintain that is you try to prevent too much familiarity between people. If we get to know each other a little bit too well, don't get too familiar with me, don't take chances with me, don't think just because you know me, you can do this, that, and the other. So workplaces try to prescribe and keep a certain formality between people. So for example, you have your job description, and the job description says, this is who you account to, this is what you do, this is your job. It tries to prescribe roles in quite strict ways. And in doing so, I think it sets out quite clearly how people relate to each other. This is who I am respectful to. This is who I can be rude to and maybe get away with it. But it sets out quite strictly how you are to relate to each other. How are you positioned vis-a-vis one another? What can you do? So workplaces try to be quite clear with that. They're professional. They try to keep the personal out. And obviously an aspect of the personal is the sexual, which which is why you do not the idea is you should not be having sexual relations in the workplace because they bring the personal in. You try to maintain the relationships as professional. So you have that relationship. So when you start bringing the personal in, you are now blurring that workplace role. And you are creating a confusion for somebody. This is my role in the workplace, but that is not how you are relating to me. How can I now respond to you? Because you're related to me on a personal level, and if I relate to you on a personal level, then I run the risk of transgressing professional roles, functions, and rules. And this is how you can get what you might call a situation that's called a double bind, where you have this conflict. So you have conflicting demands or expectations being placed on you. If you comply with one requirement, it might mean you are in violation of another. So, I mean, one way in which workplaces try to deal with sexual harassment, for example, to prevent precisely these kinds of blurred boundaries, is it is a clear part of workplace codes that you may not have relationships with each other. And that if it is found you are having, if there is a relationship between the two parties, it can become a disciplinary offense, for instance. Use another example, in some universities, lecturers may not have relationships with their students, and if they do, it is a disciplinary offense. So that is the ways in which one tries to remove that kind of confusion and that blurring of boundaries, and to prevent the leakage or the seepage of the personal into the professional, and where a personal relationship can interfere with the working relationship. You know, for instance, if I am having a relationship with my subordinate, might I also be giving that person particular favors, overlooking things? How might other people in the workplace feel if they see I'm favoring somebody over another? So that is why you try to keep this out, so that you don't allow for this blurring and for additional factors that are not relevant in the workplace to suddenly start becoming salient. So that is where this is what I'm saying is this double bind. Am I responding to you personally, or am I responding to you professionally in a context where this is supposed to be professional and the personal should not be brought in? And that conflicts as to what do I do? How do I resolve this conflict? It's very difficult for someone.
And if you bring it into this interaction between the Dutch president and Ms. Mbenenge, did you find any blurred interactions between their conversations?
Very much so. To begin with, I think just the contacting her after hours. The very first contact, for instance, follows as a result of he sees her early in the day, he sees a child, he asks about the child's father. She says, no, we are no longer together. And hours later, after hours, the judge president then contacts Ms. Mbenenge to say, oh, well, you know, I'm sorry if I might have embarrassed you. Now, that is not a workplace conversation, and it's after hours. So that's the first kind of blurring as to why is he getting in touch with her. And then we're getting into personal questions. So how many children do you have? It's not necessarily something you need to know about. That's more of a kind of getting to know you kind of question. Then I think there are the questions about can I or can't I trust you? And again, why would that be relevant? Then I think the very first clear-cut example is the pictures. He says to her, maybe a few pics you send may serve as halfway proof that presumably she can be trusted. So, I mean, I think one of the interesting points about that is to ask another person for pictures in a workplace. Why would you, a personal picture of yourself is not a requirement in this job. She's a secretary. How does sending pictures have anything to do with her job? I think another thing to look at is asking for pictures without giving any explanation as to why you want those pictures. You can see that as an expression of power, in the sense that people who can demand things of others without explanation, that's an expectation that I ask. You don't need to know why. You don't need an explanation from me. So that is a very first example. And I mean that it occurs after an earlier conversation in the day that is already, is the father around? No. That establishes there is no man in the house who might just pick up the phone and see what's going on, or asking you, why are you spending so much time on your phone after hours? So that first exchange establishes just how much, that here is somebody where there may not be a man who is going to be asking, what are you doing on your phone? Or as I said, pick it up and see what is on the phone. So, I mean, I think asking for pictures, but then the question is, then there is still in the same conversation, take off the clothes on your upper body. So for an employer to ask an employee to take off the clothes on your upper body, presumably he's meaning a topless picture. Again, how does that have anything to do with the job? Then there are the questions about what is her favorite position? Not relevant to her job at all. Quite a lot of questions about her favorite sexual position. I think also, so those are workplace boundaries, but I also want to speak a little bit about personal boundaries. So, for instance, there is a day in which there is a taxi strike and it's been quite difficult at the court. And she's still working and it's after hours. And he's still asking about a conversation from the previous night about positions. So this question is at night, and she's saying, look, I've had a rough day at work. I'm still busy at work. He disregards that and says, where were we last night? We were warming up, again referring to the questions about her positions. And then he continues, like, she says to him, oh no, are you still referring to that? His answer is, purely because we were about to land. And her response is, do you know that my exhaustion is extreme? So she's telling him, I am tired. She's still at work, and yet he is asking about her favorite sexual positions. And I mean, she actually says this a couple of times, I'm supposed to be working and you're asking me about these things. So I think there are those examples where she said, I'm doing something else. That is, and I'm tired. That is not respected. So those are in between and that's in between, I think, the workplace roles and boundaries.
I don't know if it will be easier for you to go through the conversations day by day and explain to the tribunal what your views of this type of conversations are, especially the questions asked and the replies, and how would you view the conversations?
Yes.
Chair, I don't know if you want to follow the conversations. It's the WhatsApp conversations in volume 3, page 1156. If the tribunal, the panel wants to follow this witness while she testifies.
I think as I go through it, I can give you these examples of what I mean by when she's evading, she's deflecting, she's avoiding, she's attempting to resist, or she's attempting to accommodate him.
Yes, that would be great so that we can follow exactly what you mean by saying
Okay.
she's the way she reacted.
Okay. My versions are not numbered like yours.
If you can just tell me on what date you are, then
Okay.
I will refer the panel to the specific
Okay.
pages. Are we going to start at 8 June
Yes.
2021? That will be on page 1156.
Yeah.
Chair. This is now the first conversation that I had on WhatsApp. You
It's a
already
very
explained that was the day when he established that there was no man present
in the house.
in the house.
Yes.
So what is important for you on this day's conversation?
I think that it so immediately moves into asking for photographs without any kind of explanation, and this is clearly not a job requirement, that it is persistent, that there is no taking no for an answer here. The style of pressure.
What do you mean by the style of pressure? If you can give us an example.
Sure. So I think the judge president is quite fond of using a little angel halo emoji. So he'll ask a question with this innocent little halo emoji face around it. And sometimes it can be and sometimes he'll use it after, he'll say, give me a photograph. And then will come the little picture of the angel with an angelic, innocent look. That's one emoji he likes quite a lot. But he also likes the pairing of the big eyes looking, the hearing aid listening, and the quite rapid fire nature of it. Some of his texts come within a minute of each other. And he has a kind of sequence sometimes that'll go, big eyes, I'm looking, hearing aid, I'm listening, I'm waiting to hear. And then sometimes in other communication, it'll be followed up with a zzz, I've gone to sleep, I'm waiting. So it's communicating, hurry up. It communicates expectation. And one can also see here that some of her, something she uses quite often, which is a kind of evasiveness, trying to say no without saying no.
Can you give us examples of
Sure.
that?
So I'm going to start with the where they've had this conversation about trust. Can he trust her? There's been a bit of an earlier conversation about her morals. Then can he trust her? And just after 7:25, he says, okay, truth be, he types.
Sorry, where are we?
7:25 will be 1163 up until it goes over until 1164. Which one at 1925 are you talking about? There's a few messages.
She has
The monkey with the
emoji.
shy.
Yep, the shy monkey. Then the response is, truth be told, I have no reason to doubt your word. Then her response is, that means a lot. It's hard to trust these days. Then is the first request for pictures. Maybe a few pics you send may serve as halfway proof. No response from her. A minute later, followed with the eyes, so he's looking. Then her response, and this one is her trying to say no without saying no. We'll try to take more, but currently lost the most. My phone deleted everything recently. So that's her way of saying, I don't have any pictures for you. Then his response is, hi, kidding. Cool, she says. Then he comes back, few that you've got. Then she says, will do. So there are the eyes, the eyes, licking of lips, eyes covered. She doesn't respond. 45 minutes later, he's saying, you are quiet. And then she says, oh, you want them now? Sorry, I was still at the gym. So here you have her first trying to get to avoid by saying, oh, my phone deleted everything. He doesn't take that. He says, but you've anything, a few that you've got. Although that's kind of saying to you, I don't have anything to give you, but you must have some somewhere. And then she just doesn't respond to that. Then he follows up. And so she says, oh, I was at the gym. So I'm doing other things. I'm not focusing on you. I'm not concentrating on you. I'm doing other things. So here she's used a kind of deferral. He has waited. She has
Sorry,
tried to.
I don't understand.
Sure.
Well, are you saying she was not at the gym?
No, she's saying to me, I was at the gym, but
Sorry?
she's saying I was doing something else. I was not going to it. He was expecting an immediate response. And she's saying I was doing other things. That's how I read that when she says, sorry, I was still at the gym.
Which may be true.
Exactly. But she was, the thing is, she was doing other things. It's more of the point here, I think, to look at is that he asks, she says, I haven't got any. Then he says, you must still have some. Then she says, will do. And then he's waiting as if he's expecting them immediately. And then she's saying, I'm sorry, I was busy doing something else. So she's not exactly rushing to do what he wants her to do. She's deferring, saying, okay, we'll do. Then he says, comes back with, take off the clothes on your upper body. So it's not just a photo. Now he wants a photo of her, I'm presuming, with her top off. Then her answer is again, and she's deferring. This is again an example of deferring.
At what time, can you just give us a timestamp
Sure.
of that?
So I'm assuming this is Kulula Umtla.
So it's 2028.
2028, yeah. Then she laughs and says, we'll try later. So it's the second time she has said, oh, I'm busy, deferring. So it's another example of her deferring. And it's another way she said, it's the third time she said, I don't have photographs. So she'll try later. Then there is a profile photo that is uploaded. And he indicates that smart emoji saying stylish.
Chair, that is on 1166 at 2032, page 1166, at the bottom of the page. It's also on the next page, 1167, on top there as well.
She said, we'll try later. She's again put off once again, taking the photos. And he says, please, for that assessment. Stylish, which is her having put up that profile picture. And then he says again, I'll wait. Presumably, and this is in response to her saying, we'll try later. And this is for his question about take off the clothes on your upper body. They're saying, I'll wait. Then he puts his hands on his head and says, robbed. And then there's a discussion here that I think is quite important where he calls her tricky and a trickster, which is saying that she's avoiding and evading, giving him what he wants. And she says, do you see I've given you the picture. I haven't given it to you directly because it is inappropriate. So she's put up a profile picture which would be accessible to everybody, which everybody can see. She hasn't sent him a personal picture of herself, certainly not without her top off. And he's calling her tricky and evasive for having done that, for having conned him and scammed him. Then he sends a message at 20:55. So 20:53, he asks again, the finger pointing upwards, maybe a few pics you may send as halfway proof. So he's asking again. He's reminding her, pointing upwards. And he says, and again, you are tricky. So there's an acknowledgement here that she's not giving him what he wants. And that is something that should make him question, why is she not giving me what I want? Should I be asking for, the kind of question you should be thinking about, should I be asking for this if somebody is not giving it to me, if I'm repeatedly asking and they're not giving it to me? Maybe that should make you stop and pause as to why not. So then there is go halfway now, then leave the rest for another day. She says, will do. And I think it's worth just saying how many times she's going to do it, but doesn't do it, because that alone should tell you something. That she's saying she will do it is, I think, a way, this is what I mean by deferral, as a way of giving a kind of superficial agreement without having any intention of complying. She's saying, yes, I'll do it, but I'll do it later. I'll do it at some point. And then there is the 50% at 2056, so 50%, again, presuming how much of the clothing he wishes to have removed. A snigger, eyes covered emoji.
Let me just understand. Are you saying that, is it your evidence that she did not have an intention of doing so?
If I look at the end of the day, there was no photograph with her clothing off to send to him. She never sent him that photo. So I read this. When people say they will do something and they don't do something, then you can see that they didn't want to do that.
Really?
Yes.
They might have wanted, but because of certain circumstances, those circumstances prevented them from doing so.
That could be possible, but if you look at her evidence, I don't see any evidence of her ever having sent him a topless photo.
No, that's not the point I'm asking. On what basis do you say she did not have the intention to do so?
If I look at the context of a conversation and the way in which it is unfolding, she's saying to him, I'm going to do it, but she doesn't do it. Or if I'm going to at some point in the future.
What if she didn't, in fact, intend to do it, but later changed her mind?
She would have changed her mind. She still would not have done it. At this point, she's saying it, but she's not doing it.
Isn't there some difficulty in reading somebody's message and then say, I read this message, I hear it, but this person does not mean to say what she said?
I think if one looks at the context of her messages, this is what I'm talking about being, I'll do it, but I won't do it. There is a slippage here between what she says and what she does. So she says, will do, but it isn't done immediately. And then he puts these little pressurizing emojis on her. Where is it? I'm looking, I'm waiting, you quiet. But she still hasn't done it.
Let me put it to you this way. You read the message which says what it says. And then you draw your conclusion that she did not intend to do it. That is your conclusion.
When I look at the multiple messages, let me put it to you this way. When I look how often she says she'll do things, but she doesn't do things, my impression is that she sometimes says, that's an example of deferring it. I'll do it later. Maybe she will never do it. She doesn't do it right away. He asks her to do things right away, but she defers it. She says, I will do it. It's like the same thing with the meeting. I'm going to do it. I will do it, but it never actually gets done. So I'm just pointing to that. Maybe she didn't intend to do it, but she never actually did it within this time frame. So it's giving the impression that she responds to say she'll do something, but she doesn't do it immediately, which doesn't necessarily indicate somebody who is very enthusiastic about the task.
Go ahead.
There's a certain reluctance here. Because he's saying to her, will you do it? And he's still waiting, and she's, oh, I was busy. Will you do it? I will do. But she doesn't do it. So I think one has to look consistently at it, of saying, I'm going to do it, but it doesn't ever happen. It's a bit like the example of when a parent asks a child to clean up their room, and the child says, yes, I'll do it just now. But they don't do it. So what I'm trying to point to
So
here
from
is
your example, you mean the child never intended to do it in the first place?
usually not, or they're just trying to defer when they have to do it. So what I'm trying to say is that when somebody says they're going to do something, but they don't do it, then that should raise some questions as to there is a gap here between what the person says and what the person does.
Are you
That's
not
my
making
point.
a huge jump? If somebody says, I'll do something, and later that person doesn't do it, your conclusion is that that person, when that person said, I'll do it, didn't mean it.
That can be one of the conclusions you can draw. The conclusion you can draw is that there's a certain reluctance here. If you ask somebody to do something and you ask them a couple of times and they don't do it.
No, but you ask him once.
No,
The
he
person
asked-
says, I will do it. And then the person then doesn't do it. Are you not supposed to first know why the person didn't do it before you draw the conclusion that the person did not want to do it?
I think if I look at the testimony here, there are a couple of requests. Where is the picture? The picture is put up. It's, I want more than that picture. I'll do that. Waiting. Can you send it to me? I'll do it later. That is indicating that somebody doesn't want to do it right now. So that
Well-
merely puts a question mark over,
Well, that
does
is
this
your
person want to do
conclusion.
it?
That is your interpretation of the situation.
My conclusion is that this is not somebody who's enthusiastic about doing this.
Yes, that's your conclusion.
Yes. That there is a delay here.
Just to bring it back to the complainant's evidence as well, she testified that she did not feel it is appropriate to send her pictures to the judge president. Does that correlate with what you found on how you viewed the messages?
Yes.
And that's also why she said she uploaded the picture on the status.
Yes.
Because she didn't feel that it is appropriate for her to send the picture to the judge president.
Yes, because it is an inappropriate request from a senior person to a junior person. Can I have a photograph?
Yeah, I do think the advocate Skeppers is suggesting answers to the expert. I don't want to disrupt it, but I
can't hear you.
I do think advocate Skeppers is suggesting an answer to the witness.
I'm not suggesting an answer, Chair. I am on the questions that the Chair asked the witness. Why does she come to that conclusion that seeing the replies from the complainant, she did not want to send the photos? Because that was her conclusion from what she read from the...
Except that I was posing a general question.
I hear. But
And you took it to a different angle.
But
I was just asking her whether if we read a message which says this, I'll do it, I'll do this, and the person does not do it. It was a general question.
But it was also asked that her conclusion on this messages is that the complainant did not want to send the photo. That was the question to this witness. And the complainant testified that she did not want to send the pictures.
Yes, Mrs. Kakani is saying don't suggest an answer to the witness.
I won't suggest an answer. I'm just asking if what she testified now relates to what the complainant testified. I'm not asking, suggesting any questions or answers.
That is the explanation she's giving. Mrs. Kakani.
It's okay, Chair.
Thank you. You may continue.
So it's back to the question about top off 50%, which presumably means 50% without her top off. This is, by the way, in her testimony. So this is why I am drawing some of these conclusions. I did read her testimony.
Sorry, she needs you need to help us. Which page?
It's 1170, Chair.
At 2056.
Yes.
So her response is, you know that when I want money, you will give it to me. So this is quite an unpleasant reaction to give, or to say, I want, you must give me money. So if I read the complainant's testimony, that's her trying to put him off. She's trying to suggest to him, this is a mercenary transaction. If you want my photo, then there will be money involved. She's making it quite, she isn't making it clear, she's making it clear that this is not an emotional attraction, a fondness. It's now a transaction. And then his response is, life is not about money. And then he asks again, maybe you are still asking a picture. Maybe you're still taking a picture. So I think what's quite important here is to look at, and this has informed some of my thinking around here, is how many times he's asking for the picture. Where is it? Where is it? Hands up. He makes a comment about that's 35%, so presumably not the 50% less of clothing he wanted. It's only 35 cents. She says, no ways, do not play a trick on me. And then he says to her again, you are a trickster.
Sorry, where are you now? At what time?
21:23. So again, she is not, and this is where I read her as being evasive, because he's saying, you are not giving me what I want. You are tricking me. You are robbing me. This is not what I asked for. So that's a 21:23. Don't play tricks on me. And then her response is, actually, it's 70% when adding the other one. So she's again trying to point out to him, oh, well, yes, I've tried to meet what you requested. And then his response, and this presumably is to the picture, is that the other one was a non-starter and you know it. So meaning that the other picture, the profile picture, was not acceptable, and she knows that. And her response is, oh no, Jesus. So that one reads as, oh no, you're not satisfied. It's now 21:43. She still hasn't sent him the photograph, and he's asked a number of times for the photograph. Then they continue, are you still sleeping? No, I'm still awake. Then he asks her about, remember to delete.
Chair, that is on 1174 at 22:22. What do you make of that? The question from him.
This is somebody who knows this is inappropriate. He doesn't want put it this way, he doesn't want a record of this to be maintained. Conclusion from that is there are things in there he doesn't want people to see. Then we go back to, then we look at 26:22, where the question is 50% minus 20%, and her response is 100%.
That is on page 1176, Chair.
This presumably is referring back to the photographs and how much clothing should or shouldn't be removed. And his comment is she's trying to respond to that, saying, oh, well, if you add 35%, it's this amount. Take this away, it's that amount. And he just says, your maths, I give up on it. So he's still going on about the photographs. So if you look at this, there are up to 11 different requests from him, or different ways in which he keeps asking for the photo. So even her saying, I will do, also, he doesn't want to take her word she's going to do it. It's, I want it now. Where is it? What's happening to it? Can it be like this? So there are a number of requests here for the photo, or discussions as to what should or shouldn't be in the photo. This is not something he should be asking for in the first place. And he doesn't explain what he wants the photograph for. The rest of the world is happy enough with a profile pic. Why does he want something different? Why does he want a personal photograph for himself with her top off? And he asks for it repeatedly. And she says in different ways, I don't have it because my phone deleted everything. Oh, I'm busy. Yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. Oh, but I've put it up. Oh, but if you look at this much, it's that much. So she isn't, and you can see he is dissatisfied with her responses in the way he calls her tricky and a trickster. So he wants something very definite from her, which she is not giving him. So the question that arises from that, if somebody's asking you for something and they don't give it to you, what conclusion should you draw about how willing they are to give that to you? So if we look at the 9th of June at 5:33, the finger pointing upward. Now, there was quite a lot of discussion in the evidence in chief as to what this would.
Just hold on, it's page 1178. Sorry for interrupting, yes.
That's okay. So at 5:33 in the morning is pointing upwards, which would seem to imply that that's going back to the conversation of the previous day, picking up from that point. There's a lot of discussion and debate in the testimony, but it seems to be that what is meant here is, I thought you would go down, which the complainant says she interpreted to mean, I would send you a photograph of private parts. And then her comment is busy at work. So there isn't much of an engagement on this day. Then
What do you make of this reply of hers? What type of reaction is that from her?
I'm busy. It's a form of avoiding.
Avoiding.
I can't talk to you right now. I'm busy. I've got other things going on.
And then I see later that afternoon at 17 minutes past 5, she still told him, still busy at work.
Yes.
No other conversations that she only replied twice on that day, and both of the times she said she was busy. What do you make of that?
She didn't want to engage. She was, I think when you look at somebody who is not enthusiastic, and I read that she is unenthusiastic in that She does not immediately rush. I mean, she's got a phone. She could potentially go and take her. Here she is familiar with how to use her technology and she uploads profile pictures quite often. She would know how to go and take a photograph, the top off and send it to him. She knows how to do that. She has the technological know-how and she has the equipment. If she was enthusiastic, she would send it straight away. But it isn't sent straight away.
Was it sent?
No, not that I can see. So I think it's, again, looking at the full context of these pictures, like the repeated requests to let's meet up and be intimate. That's not ever done. So I think what you have to look at here is how much enthusiasm is being expressed. How willing is the complainant to do these things? And the overall picture one gets is there is not great enthusiasm, there's not great willingness on her part.
You know, Ms. Patel, we are going to depend a lot on these messages
Mhm.
as to what they say. Now, I don't know if I understand you correctly. Are you saying that when she said still busy at work, we must understand that message as saying, actually, she was not busy, she was just trying to avoid him? Is that how we understand? You want us to interpret it? Or just to take it as his value that indeed she was a worker, she was busy at work?
You can read it at two levels. She was busy at work, but you'll see that sometimes he doesn't respect her even when she says that. But what I want to say is that sometimes when people are not enthusiastic, you need to look at their communication at two levels. There's I think especially when people are in a subordinate position and they can't always be straightforward, you do need to consider the possibility that they might be using this as a valid way to avoid having to say no. You do need to consider that.
But that is what you're doing. You're interpreting it as an excuse to give an explanation. But my question is, when she says, look, I depend on the messages, still busy at work, why doesn't actually mean that she's actually busy at work? And we accept it that way.
We can certainly do that, but I think my point would be to look at she's often telling him she's busy at work and he still ignores that. That she's not willing to really engage with him. There isn't an enthusiastic engagement because you can stop if you're really keen, you will stop what you're doing at work in order to respond and say yes, this, that, and the other.
So your proposition is, when she says still busy at work, we must read something more into it and say, it shows that she was not willing to engage him.
It shows that her work was more important to her than him engaging her. That was more important to her. And even if she uses it after hours, she has other priorities. So what she is saying is that I have other priorities right now.
No, I understand that. My concern was, are you going so far as to say she has got other priorities, right? Because she's busy at work. But are you saying to us, we must go beyond that and actually say, that message indicates that she was not keen? Is that what you're telling us?
If you look in the overall context, you can put it this way. There are other things that are more of a priority to her than engaging with Judge Mbenenge. You can see this with when she says to him, I need to do my ironing, which is later in it. So there are ways in which she says to him, I am busy with other things, I can't talk to you now, which is saying this is not a priority.
Okay. I think you understood my point. I understand what you're saying.
Did she converse with him that day?
No.
All right, you can proceed.
Okay, so we have another couple of days where she's also talking about busy in motion court and urgent that took forever. Talking a little bit about what was taking forever, expressing him expressing respect and appreciation for their work. That kind of conversation for the next few days. Then the next conversation where they go back into more sexual topics is on the 16th of June.
16th of June is on page 1182, Chair. 1182.
So there is a conversation about stress at work, which she's talking about the difficulties with the court manager and how it has left her. And he then says something about, or gives an indication. Try and find it. Okay, so it will be at 1723.
Chair, that will be on page 1190.
Maybe, sorry, we should go a little bit earlier to question of the hug. Yeah, so that's at 1715.
1715 is on page 1188, Chair. The 16th of June is a public holiday in South Africa, so this was after hours. What do you make about that? If you have any comments on that?
Well, again, I think it's going back to the fact that it's again blurring these workplace boundaries. Not a work day.
Yes, you wanted to go back to 1715?
So his comment is, I'll be happy and give you a hug. She makes a response about
Just make sure you're...
oh, sorry. She makes comment about you disciplined. Once you have a principle, you'll be like an eagle. And then she commenting directly on the hug, responding or replying to that text. Says the latter is exciting. Maybe it's better. And the evidence she's talking about, it's been a hard day for her. Kind of reassuring hug would be appreciated. And then his response to that is, as long as it won't generate warmth. So suggesting it would be possibly, or implying that it may be more than just a reassuring hug. It could generate some kind of warmth. So she asks, how's that possible? He just says it could. And then he says, depends. Please declare upfront, it's not a shame. Which she interpreted him to be meaning, you can be clearer. You can say what you want out of this hug. It's not going to be embarrassing if you say more. And she says, well, some things are better not said. Then he asks at 1724, 4, are you quick to melt? So again, asking about what would, if I'm hugging you, would you be, I'm reading it as back to her, because it was in the context of the discussion around the hug, would you melt quickly? Would your, would your defenses be overcome? Would your desires be aroused? Would you melt would you melt? She says, depends.
What do you make of that answer of hers? Depends. Are you quick to melt?
It's quite non-committal. It depends on the situation. It's a very neither here nor there response. It doesn't tell you. It's a very general response. Anyone could make it. It depends on what situation. And you can see for him, it's not clear what she's saying. So he says depends on. This is the first thing you're thinking. So she doesn't respond immediately. Yeah, are you still thinking? Presumably on the depends, which is what he puts underneath. Are you still thinking? It depends on. And then her response is, no, I'm not thinking, I'm cooking. So again, I am doing something else, like I am busy at work, I am cooking. And her response to on is the oven temperature. So he laughs and then deletes her emojis. And then there is him saying, a question he asked, and then deletes it. But you can see the question is there because she replies to it. If you happen to have melted step 1. So the way I read her response is she's tried to shift, is that firstly she's tried to shift the conversation away from melting and hugs and warmth into this is what I'm doing right now and it's cooking. I'm cooking right now. So she's tried to shift the conversation away from discussions about melting, warmth, hugs and the liking. And I am cooking right now. It's back to like I am busy at work. I am now cooking. So she's telling him what she's doing, what she is busy with. His question is about if you happen to have melted step 1. And her reply is, it would mean the marinade worked before the meat. So if we look at the context that she's talking about cooking and meat, his point is, if you happen to have melted step 1, where I would understand that to mean is step 1 in your cooking is your marinade. And she's saying, if the marinade melts it before you've cooked it, your meat, then things haven't worked. They said, if you happen to have melted step 1, she's marinade has worked before you've even cooked it. So he agrees.
Yeah.
1191
1732.
at the bottom of the page, Chair. Yes, you can continue. So you are saying that she tried to shift the conversation in another direction.
Yes, she's talking about her cooking, which she's doing at that time. It's not the first time. She talks about doing other things. This is an example. So I am busy, I am cooking, I am studying, and then there's another point where she talks about ironing. So she's talking about what I am doing right now, what my priorities are right now, what I am doing and thinking about. So he agrees, true. And then he goes back to, if you happen to have melted step 1, he returns to that conversation, and it's the ear with the hearing aid.
That
I'm
is
listening.
on page 1192, Chair, on the top.
At 1733. So he's still listening for an answer to, if you happen to have melted step 1. Now, hi, as she explained, it means no, and then we have the laughing emojis. Then we have a set of 2 deleted messages, and he's still asking, I am listening, and she's giving zipped lips, I'm not saying. And then we have, at another point, he's again asking. Her response, he says, just speak, and she laughs. And then she asks him as a question of clarity, tell me what is the first step you're talking about? So she is, the way I would understand her to be saying this is, you're not clear. What step one are you talking about? So you can see that he's trying to suggest some kind of sexual innuendo with, from this, what if it generates warmth? What if you melt? There is an attempt to perhaps infuse a certain sexuality into the conversation. And she is not hearing that. So she's saying to him, tell me, what is this first step you are talking about? She's asking him to be very explicit. What do you mean? And then he answers, position one. So she's again says to him, being, stop riddles. His answer, I'm assuming, because she has copied it as a reply, is assuming melting occurs evenly. So she's saying, yes, that's not disputed, which is not really saying anything, assuming melting occurs evenly. So he's back. So his answer is presumably position one of action. So it's back to shifting it back into a sexual register. So she's saying to him, what has a name? He must have presumably, one assumes he may have responded, because you have two deleted messages and then the question and you.
That is on page 1194, Chair.
So him asking and you suggests that he may have given what his favorite positions were. I've told you now, I'm assuming, could be wrong, but it suggests he may have, usually when you do that in conversation, I've told you, now you tell me. And you? Her response is, again, not to tell him, to say, oh, there is no space on my phone. And I don't want these messages to be seen. So she's still not telling him. She's just saying, I'm deleting them. He agrees with her, and then he returns. Position one of action, he's listening. I'm coming back to this. This is repeatedly bringing her back to this point of, I want to know. There is some more. Yeah. Then there is again listening, and then there is a message that it seems like he might have deleted because she's replying to it, but I can't find it in the text, is where he says, I do, ellipses, come. The way it's spelt implies ejaculate. But his wording underneath there is, I do delete them rather. And then he covers his eyes. And then again he asks a question, whichever position might come first.
Chair, that's on 1195.
So he's now asked quite repeatedly, which is your favorite position? And she has either tried to divert the conversation, or she has said, I am deleting things off my phone. She's not responding to the question. He's asked it now a couple of times. So now she does respond, but you can see from the questions that follow, it's not the answer he wants. Her answer is, I'll go with whatever, but there's a word I like, surprise. So she's not telling him. She's saying, you can surprise me, but that's an answer that also doesn't tell him what her favorite position is. So he responds with a lol. And then he persists, because you can see that he wants a specific answer. So he persists. But you can't not have a favorite position. So he wants a particular answer out of her, even though she has given him an answer. It's surprise. But he doesn't want that answer. So the way one can interpret some of the ways he keeps on repeating these questions is that he wants a particular answer. And if he doesn't get it, he continues to ask it until he gets something. So then we go back to, but you can't not have a favorite position. Then the listening ear. And then, I'm just asking at the level of naughty talk chat. Then again the ear. So, and then zzz, presumably indicating falling asleep. So here we have her last response is at 6:15, or 18:16. He's asked at 18:39, he said lol, with you can't not have a favorite position, followed up by the listening ear. Then at 18:48, he's asked again, purely at the level of naughty talk chat. Then he's put the ear again at 18 minutes past 8. And then he's done his zzz at just after 11 o'clock, 19 minutes past 11. So he's asked her and she has not responded. She has said nothing. And then on the 17th of June, it looks as if he's picked up the conversation again. He starts off the 17th with, they say you do not get into them. So since you get into positions, I'm assuming that he's still referring back to the previous night's conversation.
Just to be clear, are you now on 17 June at 1938?
Yes.
What we got during the evidence was that he told her that she must not go to work.
Oh, okay.
So that it is not in relation to the previous
Okay.
conversation.
So at any rate, the last conversation ends with him commenting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times and her not responding. And then she's again commenting on what's happening at work. So I think if you look at the conversation, you can see there are up to 14 questions, at least, if not more, that he's asked her about melting and positions. So they've been repeated in various ways because he wants to know. And the best he could get out of her was surprise. But you could see that's not as satisfactory because it's followed up again. So we go back to 17th of June, which still continues with the conversations about positions. And it starts at 21:27.
That will be on page 1198, Chair. Yes, you can continue.
So now, I mean, she's already told him it's been a rough day at work. And she's talked about the urgent application and the strike. So at 21:27, he goes back to, where were we last night? We were warming up. And her response is, oh no, are you still referring to that? That, again, is like, oh no, are we going there again? Are you still talking about that? I thought that was, the implication I read from this is, are you still talking about that? That was yesterday's conversation. Are you still going on about that? And I think one can read, she's not thrilled to go back to that because she never answered him. He continued asking questions about her favorite position, and that's how the evening ended. And he was still asking her, and she was not responding. So she's, which if you're being asking those questions and somebody's not responding, that's not something they necessarily want to respond to. And I think that's reinforced by her saying, "Are you still referring to that?" and him saying purely because we were about to land. This is quite, I think, here there seems to be him assuming that there was something mutual going on. Because where were we last night? We were warming up. This ignores the fact that she said she gave him the answer of surprise and then did not respond to him again. So there isn't that much mutuality going on. Because we were about to land. Even though she did not respond to him, he is still seeming to think that there was something mutual going on there, that she was telling him what her favorite position was. And then her response is, the exhaustion is extreme. I'm about to sleep. So I'm extremely tired. I want to go to sleep. This is not the time for the conversation. And then it gets into a set of conversations about who's getting up at what hour of the morning to go to work or to write a judgment. And then at 9:20, she says, understood, and it has the embarrassed monkey emoji. He has these halo angel emoji and smile hug face, and then a set of messages with one saying BJ equals, presumably meaning blowjob, and this is how from the evidence it appears that how the complainant understood it.
That's on page 1200. Okay.
At 2132. So although she has told him that she's tired, she's exhausted, it's been a long day, he is still continuing to message her. And it would seem from this, it has sexual content as well. She responds at 2134, not to worry about that. Another deleted message. She says something about length. He says, okay. And then she finishes off by saying, I was still busy, sorry. So presumably explaining why she's not responding to him. So on the 18th of June, the ear at 52 minutes after midnight indicates that he's still waiting for some sort of response.
That's on 1201, Chair. One. Yes. She's getting ready for work. And then this again appears to be a sexual suggestion around especially rare things. Am I wrong? Not at all. Again, you're writing and deleting, but you know I'm busy. So again, she's saying to me, this is distracting. And he says he's distracting because he doesn't want to distract. So then we get to 20th of June. Chair, that would be on 1202 in the middle, but then it jumps over to 1203. It's continuing there.
So We go to 22-23. 2022-23.
Sorry, say again, 22, 23.
Yeah.
Of the respondents' messages.
Mm.
It's 1203, Chair. It's on the bottom of the page. Yes.
He says, we had not finished our conversation. So that presumably he's referring back to favorite positions. She does the embarrassed, and he says underneath there the other day. So there's previous comments about our conversation, we were about to land, etc. That's the meaning one takes from that. So she has her embarrassed monkey emoji and face, and I am so lazy. Looking at her evidence in chief, the interpretation seems to be settled on, I don't really want to get into this. I don't really want to have this discussion. Then he sends her a picture which she comments on as him being cute. And then, to do what? You make me shy. In what way? And then we get to her saying, I'm in East London, it would be better if we could meet face to face.
Chair, that will be on page 1206.
So why this conversation becomes important is now there is a meeting, a possible meeting, and it's the purpose of the meeting. Why would we be meeting? What would we be doing if we were to meet? So in East London, where she's working, retirement of her grandmother, and then he goes from, so it's 10:30 from her, talking about the retirement of her judge. He says, okay. And then he jumps from the meeting straight into, you reckon we can be intimate this week?
Chair, that would be on page 1208 on top. Yes.
You reckon we can be intimate this week? I don't know what her response is. It looks like a sticker of some sort. And then he follows up at 22:32 to say, I'm just asking. And her response is to say, go and read the first word in the Causa Bible of Psalms 1, verse 1. So the way I understand this is she knows him to be religious. She's reminding him of that and referring him to read the Bible. She's giving him, the Bible is a guide to moral conduct. So when you refer people back to the Bible, you are often, one of the things you are doing is you are reminding them of moral behavior and what does the Bible say about what is moral and how we should behave.
She also said the reason why she referred him to that specific verse in the Causa Bible was because of the first word.
Yes. And she actually says that in her WhatsApp. And he says, he obviously doesn't go and look. But says, what does it say? Please remind me. And she says, I wanted you to Google or peruse it. I wanted you to go and read it. I wanted you to see for yourself.
That's on page 1209, Chair. Please. Sorry, you can continue.
Okay, so his response is at 22:34 about not associating with evildoers. So even if he leaves the word no, he's got the gist of it. can we be intimate? And her response is, don't associate with evildoers. That's not exactly a sign of, that's not enthusiastic yes to what he's just asked. Wow. So again, the ear, explain. She says, Psalms 1 verse 1 in capitals. Hi, no. So she's very clear. I mean, to his response, you reckon we can be intimate? No.
If you reach a convenience.
Yes, it's almost lunchtime, so just maybe finish this conversation
Sure.
where you think it's appropriate for us to adjourn for the lunch break.
Yeah. There is also, so there's that. Then there is, I'm at East London. It would be better if we could meet face to face. So he's pointing up again about the meeting. She then goes and Googles, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked. So that's another way of saying that after she has said no, that the person who stays away from the wicked ones is blessed. She says to him, we should look at each other, not be intimate. So she's saying to him, I would meet with you, but it's under these conditions. It's that we look at each other. We are not intimate. She's being very clear. No, I am not going to be intimate with you, but if we do meet, it will be to look at each other. It will not be anything. It will not be anything other than that. Let me go back to him waiting for an answer, fanning himself, or a gif of a man fanning himself, and again saying, what he's previously said, what if we melt, which is not impossible. So he suggested, what if our feelings overcome each other? And then, which would be reinforced by the picture of the man fanning himself, presumably being overcome by heat and emotion. And she responds to his comment of, it's not impossible with, it is impossible. So she has been quite clear. No, don't associate yourself with wicked people, with evildoers. It is impossible. But we can meet in order to speak. Then it continues. She says to me, getting, the picture of the man fanning himself, you're getting provoked very early. And then he says to her, but why do you say it's impossible? And then he goes back to say to her, are you provoking? She's saying it's principle. And then he continues on with, I was going to give you this from the picture of the banana emoji.
That is on page 1213, Chair, at 2245.
So she has said to him, no, it's impossible. We can meet, but it won't be intimate. We can look at each other. And he's continuing with, but I was going to give you this one, the banana, presumably meaning the penis. And her response is, honorable member, don't do that. It's an expression of disapproval. And then he concludes with, you want us to just be friends? He's again listening for a response. She's saying, you're quiet. And she says, I don't have any answers.
Thanks for watching.